Donum Estate, which is our home ranch, is located in the Carneros region, so that's the southern part of Sonoma County. We're on a group of hills, which are the first hills coming out of the marshlands around San Pablo Bay. So we're really close to that bay influence. We get a lot of wind, a lot of cool air. The ultimate expression in a wine is to really be able to taste the place in which it's grown. So that's what we mean when we talk about terroir. In Carneros specifically, we've got quite a few factors in play. We've got a lot of clay in the soil, so that gives the wines an earthier character. We're really close to the bay, so we have heavy maritime influence that can lend a little bit of salinity. It can also, of course, lowers the temperature, so that makes the wines a little more elegant. And then because a lot of our vineyards are on slopes, we have different angles that the sun strikes the vine, and so all that plays into the wines. Within our Carneros portfolio, we have 6 different Pinot Noirs. 2 of those, the Estate Pinot and the Three Hills, are blended from across the estate, different styles of wine. And then we have 4 small bottlings. That's East Slope and West Slope, Mikado Tree, and White Barn. And each of those bottlings tries to capture a really specific part of the estate and really present a different style of wine. So Carneros is our home region, and this is the Pinot Noir that we started out making in 2001. We've made it every year since then. For us, it's really important to show the appellation. So Carneros is known for earthier wines, more red fruit. So we're really going for a concentrated, layered wine, probably a little bit more richness than many Carneros producers. And the other thing that's really important to me is that I think our estate, just this little parcel, has its own terroir signature. And for me, that's a certain flavor profile that I get every year. Sometimes I describe it as sort of like a root beer, sassafras, licorice type of characteristic. And so I think even though it's a blend from multiple different blocks, it still has a really strong signal of the land, and that's important to show in our Carneros Pinot. As the estate vineyards grown and matured, we realized that there's more than one expression of this particular parcel. So we have our Carneros Pinot, and then the Three Hills is sort of another way of expressing it. So it's a little bit lighter. Some of the blocks are on hillsides, thus the name Three Hills. There's 3 hills that make up the estate property. And so by combining those, we're able to make a lighter style, a little bit more elegant wine. It still has kind of that Donum depth and intensity, but it's a little bit lower in alcohol, a little bit higher acidity, a little bit more red fruit, a little bit more tannin because it doesn't spend as much time in the sunlight. So the idea is to really just show a different side of this property and some of the new blocks. Mikado Tree Pinot Noir is actually the first wine that we've named after one of the art pieces on the property. And this came about because in 2016, we were tasting through some of the younger blocks and realized there might be something special. And then in 2017, we harvested a few of those blocks specifically at kind of a medium-high ripeness level. So not too ripe, but also not on the light side. And this allowed us to make a wine that's very expressive, very rich, but also really well balanced. And the Mikado Tree is an interesting sculpture. It's a children's game on a large scale. And so that sort of inspired the wine. We've got these younger vines. There's something sort of adolescent, sort of a youthful exuberance to the wine, and of course to the sculpture as well. So it's the first wine that we've done that's really kind of inspired by one of the art pieces. White Barn was a new wine for us in 2016. This was from a really small block of a Swiss clone of Pinot Noir called Wädenswil. And it's right around an old little horse barn that's one of the original structures from the old ranch on the property. And this Wädenswil clone, I really like to harvest it on the early side. So we wanted to take that block and do something totally different from our other Carneros wines. So for that one, we pick about 2 weeks earlier than everything else, and we include some whole bunches, so we have a stem factor in the wine. By including the stems, we add an earthier, almost foresty note to the wine that really, I think, adds some interest. And it's a very different wine because it's low in alcohol, but also relatively low in acid, so it's got a nice softness on the palate. It's the kind of wine that I like to serve earlier in a meal with a lighter course. It's really well balanced, so it gives you even more pairing options because it doesn't have that sharpness that you sometimes get in a lighter wine. The first reserve wine that we introduced to the Donum portfolio was in 2007 with the West Slope. This is the oldest block on our estate vineyard, and it's also planted to a really specific clone that's kind of unique to Donum, so we refer to it as our Donum selection. So this is a western facing slope, which means it's warmer. It sits right above the pond, so it gets a little bit of reflected sunlight, it gets the afternoon sun, And because of this special clone, it ripens really slowly. So we harvest it later in the year, get a lot of richness. Really, the vine age gives it a lot of depth. So this is a pretty powerful expression of Pinot Noir, but it's also incredibly well balanced. It's really exciting for me to reintroduce the East Slope. Some of our oldest members will remember this wine. This is a single block wine that we started in 2009, but the last vintage we made was 2013 because we had to replace the vineyard block. So now in 2019, we've got the vineyard producing again, and we're able to bring this wine back. The East Slope Pinot Noir comes from eastern-facing slopes. So these are blocks that get morning sunlight, and then the sun kind of goes over the hill during the hardest part of the day, cooling them down, so leading to a lighter, more elegant wine. It's always made from the Calera clone, which is a Heritage California selection. It's one of my favorite clones because it yields a really rich, dark fruited wine, but with good acidity and really nice balance. Along with the West Slope, it really shows how a couple simple changes, really just the aspect, morning sun versus afternoon sun, and a little bit of clonal difference, can yield two completely different wines, even though the winemaking on both is pretty similar. The name Donum comes from Latin, meaning gift, and the idea behind that was that the wine is kind of a gift from the land. Each of our wines is an expression of the land in which it's grown. I think that the Carneros portfolio really is an interesting way of expressing that, because you have the single block wines like Mikado Tree, White Barn, and East and West Slope that show off a really specific place. And then you have the Carneros and Three Hills, which show off a little bit of a broader view, but are still very much driven by the land, by the climate, by the terroir, essentially. That's why it's interesting to consider the portfolio as a whole. I think each wine is a unique expression, but together they kind of all speak to that idea that the land is the most important part of winemaking.